They say truth is stranger than fiction. While storybook detectives like Sherlock Holmes are well known to the public, few of their real-life counterparts enjoy such fame. This is a shame, since there are plenty of singular sleuths with fascinating careers that are definitely worthy of mention, and in the video today, well, we're going to mention some of them. Number 10. Leonard Nipper Reid. In 1946, Leonard Nipper Reid tried to join the police force in his hometown of Nottingham, England. Unfortunately for him, the city had a minimum height requirement of 6 feet, and the diminutive Reid, he was rejected. A year later, he moved to London, which was less restrictive, and became an officer with the Metropolitan Police. Reid's first major case happened in 1963, when he was part of a Scotland Yard team sent to Buckinghamshire to investigate the Great Train Robbery. Although Bruce Reynolds was considered the mastermind of the operation, Nipper believed the true architect was an Irishman named Mickey, who meticulously devised robberies and sold the plans to interested gangs. Reid's biggest challenge came in 1964 when he was offered a task force to have a go at taking down The Firm. This was an East End gang headed by the infamous Kray twins. 5 years later, Ronnie and Reggie Kray were found guilty and they were sentenced to life in prison. Number 9. Charlie Siringo, the Cowboy Detective. Born in 1855 in Matagorda County, Texas, Charlie Siringo spent 2 decades as a Pinkerton detective. He specialized in working undercover and took part in some of the agency's most notorious cases. Siringo had a long and varied career which saw him investigate rustlers, killers, assassins, and labor unions from Alaska to Mexico. He is well remembered for his role in the Coeur d'Alene labor strike of 1892. This erupted in violence after miners discovered that Pinkerton had infiltrated their union and was routinely sending back information to the mine owners. Siringo had mixed feelings about his work. He sympathized with the workers, but at the same time he realized that the leadership of labor unions was in the hands of anarchists like George Pettibone. The latter would be implicated in the assassination of Idaho Governor Frank Steunenberg. Charles Siringo started pursuing Butch Cassidy's infamous Wild Bunch following the 1899 Wilcox train robbery. He spent 4 years, traveled 25,000 miles, and helped capture some of the gang's most ruthless members, such as Kid Curry. He was finally called off the case once Cassidy and the Sundance Kid fled to South America. Siringo, though, he had one more memorable moment in his career when he saved lawyer Clarence Darrow from a lynch mob. Darrow would later defend teacher John T. Scopes in the famous Scopes monkey trial. Number 8. Dave Toschi. San Francisco detective Dave Toschi was instantly recognizable when he walked into a room thanks to the snappy bow ties that he liked to wear alongside plaid suits and trench coats. He became an inspiration for iconic movie cops of the 1960s and 70s, and when he was on the clock, he also investigated the infamous Zodiac killer. Toschi joined the San Francisco Police Department in 1953 after serving in the Korean War. He entered the hunt for the Zodiac in 1969 after the murder of Paul Stine, the killer's only known victim in San Francisco. The case gnawed at him and it ended up giving him an ulcer. Toschi would visit the scene of Stine's murder for many years afterwards, hoping that he might spot an overlooked clue that might lead to the identity of the notorious serial killer. Although not as famous as the Zodiac killings, Toschi also investigated and helped solve the zebra murders. These were a series of racially motivated slayings from the early 70s by a group called the Death Angels that claimed at least 15 victims. Toschi's unique style caught the eye of Hollywood. Clint Eastwood partially based Dirty Harry Callahan on him, while Steve McQueen borrowed his penchant for wearing a quick-draw holster for his character in Bullet. The extra attention, though, went to Toschi's head a little. In an ill-advised indulgence, the detective sent anonymous letters to the San Francisco Chronicle praising his own work. This got him booted off the case 9 years after Stine's murder. Number 7. Kate Warne. In 1856, Kate Warne was a 23-year-old widow looking for employment. One day, she entered the Chicago office of the Pinkerton Detective Agency and spoke with Alan Pinkerton himself. He was rather surprised to find out that she wasn't there for a clerical job, but rather was responding to the position of detective that was advertised in the newspaper. At first, Pinkerton didn't want a female detective, but Warne argued that she could obtain information in ways that men simply could not. She could either befriend the wives and girlfriends of the suspects or convince the men themselves to boast about their actions. Pinkerton was swayed, and Kate Warne became his first female detective. Warne's big case took place in 1858. Someone was embezzling funds from the Adams Express Company, and Pinkerton suspected the Montgomery office manager, Nathan Maroney. Kate went undercover, befriended his wife, and got the evidence, which led to his conviction. The female detective was praised for her role in investigating the Baltimore plot, an alleged conspiracy to assassinate then-President-elect Abraham Lincoln. Warne used her undercover tactics to pose as a Southern belle with secessionist sympathizers, infiltrate social gatherings, and collect information from Pinkerton. We'll never know if the threat was real or not, but Lincoln made it to his inauguration, possibly thanks to the Pinkertons. Number 6. Jerome Caminada. Sherlock Holmes is, without a doubt, the world's most famous detective. There have been long debates about who served as an inspiration for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's iconic character. The author typically pointed the finger at Scottish surgeon and lecturer Joseph Bell, as well as his compatriot, Sir Henry Littlejohn. Doyle also hailed the few fictional detectives that came before Holmes, such as Auguste Dupin and Monsieur Lecoq. But there were also real-life investigators who resembled Sherlock Holmes enough that they became regarded as inspirations. Jerome Caminada, he was one of them. He worked as a detective in Manchester. He gained national prominence during the 1880s, shortly before the first appearance of Doyle's detective. He wore disguises during cases and employed a network of unofficial informers similar to Holmes's irregulars. After Caminada retired from the police force in 1899, he became a consulting detective and worked cases all over the country. He even had his own Moriarty-style arch-rival in the form of one Bob Horridge. Caminada's finest moment as a detective came in 1889 during a case dubbed the Manchester Cab Mystery. Businessman John Fletcher hailed a cab outside Manchester Cathedral and left with an unidentified young man. An hour later, when the driver stopped, he found Fletcher dead and his companion gone. Using clues, deduction, and his knowledge of the criminal underworld, Caminada identified the killer as 18-year-old Charlie Parton. He had a past of using chloral hydrate to rig illegal fights by drugging the fighters. The detective believed Parton also used it to occasionally subdue and rob people. Chloral hydrate combined with Fletcher's love of gin resulted in a poisonous mixture, which caused his death. Number 5. Chang Apana. Speaking of fictional detectives, there are few more divisive than Charlie Chan. The Chinese-American sleuth appeared in 6 novels written by American author Earl de Biggers, and he's also appeared in dozens of movies and television shows. Some regard him as racist and offensive, since he was a stereotype and was often portrayed by white actors in yellowface. Others see him in a more positive light, since Charlie Chan was one of the first Asian characters in Hollywood who broke away from the evil Chinaman trope. What's relevant to us today, though, is that he was inspired by real-life Honolulu detective Chang Apana. Born Chang Apeng, he moved back to China when he was 3 years old, but returned to Hawaii when he was 10. He joined the force in 1898 and became a detective in 1916. He carried a bullwhip instead of a gun. He learned to use it while working as a Hawaiian cowboy before becoming a cop. Chang mostly worked Chinatown and dealt with many smuggling and gambling cases. Because he was multilingual, he developed a network of informants inaccessible to other cops. There are many outlandish stories of his adventures on the force. He was once thrown out of a second-story window and landed on his feet. He had a scar above his right eye from a fight with a Japanese leper armed with a sickle. He once arrested 40 gamblers at once, single-handed, wielding only that trusty whip. Unsurprisingly, it's rather hard to separate fact from fiction with this guy. Number 4. Jigsaw. John P. St. John. John P. St. John was one of the most tenacious and prolific officers in American history. He served the Los Angeles Police Department for 51 years, 43 of them as a homicide detective. He investigated around 1,500 murders and solved over 1,000 of them. By the time he retired in 1993, his seniority on the force earned him the privilege of carrying badge number 1. Sir John gained the nickname of Jigsaw John early on in his career when he worked a dismemberment case. It stuck for decades because other officers thought St. John had a knack for putting clues together, rather like a puzzle. One of John's first cases remains one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in American history, the murder of Elizabeth Short. It was the first in a long list of infamous killings that St. John tackled as a homicide detective for the LAPD. He investigated serial killers like Harvey Glassman, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, the Hillside Stranglers, and the Grim Sleeper. In 1982, St. John became only the second recipient of the police department's Distinguished Service Medal for his 8-year investigation that led to the capture of William Bonin, one of the freeway killers. Number 3. Izzy Einstein and Mo Smith. With the passing of the Volstead Act in 1919, prohibition came to the United States. A new agency was needed to enforce the law, and thus the Bureau of Prohibition was born. Izzy Einstein and Mo Smith, well, they were its top detectives. Since the new unit was hiring, Isidor Einstein tried his luck as it paid better than his previous job as a postal clerk. The chief, though he didn't want him. Einstein was middle-aged, short, and stocky, not exactly bureau material. However, Izzy convinced him that that was an asset and not a hindrance, since bootleggers wouldn't suspect him. Izzy was right. There were times when he could knock on the door of a speakeasy with his badge on display and say he was a prohibition agent. People would still let him in and give him a drink because they thought it was a gag. Other times he would carry a prop like a jug of milk or a jar of pickles. As he put it, who would suspect that a fat man with pickles was an agent? Soon after being hired, Izzy convinced his friend Mo Smith to stop selling cigars and join him as an agent. Neither one of them had any law enforcement experience, yet they were responsible for almost 5,000 arrests with a 95% conviction rate. Izzy and Mo liked to wear disguises to gain entry to speakeasies. If the bar was near a hospital, they would wear white coats. If it was a lawyer bar, they would come in carrying heavy law texts. Sometimes they would even dress as husband and wife. The duo's success, it was their undoing. They were fired after 5 years with the Bureau because everyone else resented them for their skill and popularity. Obviously, very solid hiring practice there. Number 2. William J. Burns. Many real-life detectives have been compared to Arthur Conan Doyle's creation, but William J. Burns was called America's Sherlock Holmes by none other than Doyle himself. Burns started his law enforcement career as an assistant to a private eye. He then became a Secret Service agent. His success led him to opening the William J. Burns International Detective Agency. Several high-profile cases and a few notable connections led to him becoming director of the Bureau of Investigating, the BOI, the precursor to the FBI, and he did that from 1921 to 1924. Burns investigated 2 infamous early cases of domestic terrorism. In 1910, his agency looked into the bombing of the Los Angeles Times building, which killed 21 people. Burns went undercover with the anarchist movement and arrested brothers John and James McNamara. 10 years later, he investigated the Wall Street bombing. That case remains unsolved, though, but not for a lack of trying. Burns' agency detectives went undercover all the way to the Soviet Union in an attempt to unearth the culprits. Burns' reputation, it took a severe hit when he was implicated in the Teapot Dome scandal. Detectives from his agency were hired to investigate the jurors in the trial of oil tycoon Harry Ford Sinclair. He was forced to resign from the BOI, and he was replaced by J. Edgar Hoover. Burns retired to Florida and took up writing detective stories. Number 1. Eugène Vidocq. Eugène Vidocq started out on a life of crime which seemed destined to end with the trip to the gallows. However, he eventually switched sides and used his keen understanding of the criminal mind to combat crime instead. Vidocq's crime fighter career, it started in 1809, shortly before his 34th birthday. He had once again been arrested, except this time he offered his services as an informant. His skill and reputation made him a formidable spy. Less than 2 years later, he was released and continued to work undercover on the outside. Vidocq lobbied hard for a plain clothes unit and obtained it in 1812. It was successful, and a year later Napoleon turned it into a national police force. The detective opened more branches around the country and kept expanding his underworld network of informants. He also employed innovative techniques like early ballistics and plaster casts of shoe prints. Not just an officer of the law, Vidocq was a celebrity in his own right. He befriended writers such as Balzac and Victor Hugo and used a ghostwriter to pen his memoirs. Other police officers, they weren't really a fan of him though. He sort of stole the spotlight, and they also believed that he was sort of still a criminal. They thought he might be taking bribes from other people, and even that he potentially solved his own crimes. In 1833, Vidocq left the force and opened the Office of Information, which came to be regarded as the world's first known private detective agency. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, do give us a thumbs up below. Let us know how we're doing with a comment, all of that good stuff. If you're looking for another video, why not check out something from the archives, linked to on the screen now. Also, I've got a podcast. It's called The BrainFood Show. If you just search BrainFood, one word, in iTunes, you're gonna find that. And as always, thank you for watching.